The transport ship moved slowly through the darkness of space toward the massive station that hung between three dying stars. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the viewing window and watched as the structure grew larger with each passing minute. He had never seen anything like it before. The Galactic Council Station was enormous and shaped like a wheel with 12 spokes that glowed with different colors. Each spoke belonged to one of the ancient civilizations that ruled this part of the galaxy. Jake felt his stomach tighten as he thought about the meeting ahead. Earth had been contacted by the Council only 6 months ago, and everything had moved so fast since then. Now he was here to negotiate humanity's place among the stars. Behind him stood 3 other members of Earth's delegation. Dr. Lisa Bennett was reviewing data on her tablet and occasionally looked up at the station with wonder in her eyes. She was Earth's top scientist and had spent the last 6 months studying everything the Council had shared about their technology. Colonel Ryan Hayes stood with his arms crossed, and his face showed no emotion, but Jake knew the military strategist was analyzing every detail of the station's defenses. The 4th member was Ambassador Claire Davis, who had decades of experience in international diplomacy. Back on Earth, but even she looked nervous about this. Meeting the transport ship docked at one of the lower ports, and a message appeared on the main screen telling them to proceed to Council Chamber 7. Jake led his team through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The walls were covered in symbols and writing from languages humanity had never seen before. Other species passed them in the hallways, and most barely glanced at the humans. Some were tall and thin, with skin that shimmered like oil. Others were short and covered in thick fur. A few looked almost human, but their eyes were too large, or their hands had too many fingers. Jake realized that Earth was late to this gathering of civilizations, and everyone here already knew each other. They reached the council chamber, and the doors opened to reveal a massive circular room with seats, arranged in tiers like an ancient amphitheater. At the center was a raised platform where Jake and his team were directed to stand. The seats around them began to fill with representatives from the 12 council species. The lighting in the room shifted and focused on the human delegation, making Jake feel like he was on trial. Voice boomed from speakers hidden somewhere in the walls. It took a moment for Jake to realize that his translator device was converting the alien speech into English. The voice introduced itself as Zethkar, and he was the primary representative for the Velcrin species. A figure emerged from one of the upper tiers and moved down to a position where everyone could see him clearly. Zethkar was tall, with dark purple skin and 4 arms that moved in gestures that seemed both graceful and threatening. His face was angular, and his eyes were bright yellow without any visible pupils. Zethkar spoke, and his words were formal, but the tone was dismissive. He welcomed Earth to the Galactic Council, and then immediately explained that all new species had to be evaluated and classified. The classification system determined what rights and responsibilities each species had within council space. Jake had expected this, and he stepped forward to present Earth's case. He talked about humanity's achievements in science and art. He mentioned Earth's diversity and how humans had overcome countless challenges to reach the stars. He tried to explain that Earth wanted to be a partner with the Council and contribute to the greater galactic community. Zethkar listened without interrupting, but when Jake finished the Velcrin, representative laughed. It was a harsh sound that echoed through the chamber, and several other council members joined in. Zethkar said that Earth's presentation was amusing but ultimately meaningless. He explained that the Council had encountered thousands of species over millions of years, and humanity was nothing special. In fact, he continued, Earth was quite primitive compared to most spacefaring civilizations. The Velcrin had been traveling between stars for over 50,000 years. While humanity had barely left its own solar system, the classification was announced without any further discussion. Earth was designated as Class 7, Ambassador. Davis asked what that meant, and Zethkar seemed annoyed that he had to explain. Class 7 species were considered barely capable of basic spaceflight and were required to provide resources and labor to higher class civilizations in exchange for protection and guidance. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. Earth would surrender 70% of all mineral resources mined from its solar system. Earth would provide work crews for off-world mining operations and other systems. Earth would accept monitoring stations throughout its territory to ensure compliance. Earth would have no voting rights in council decisions and no ability to object to council policies. Jake felt his face flush with anger, and he started to protest, but Zethkar raised one of his four hands and guards appeared from doorways around the chamber. They were heavily armed, and their weapons were pointed at the human delegation. Zethkar said that the decision was final and any resistance would result in Earth being reclassified as Class 8, which would be much worse. He suggested that humanity should be grateful for the Council's mercy and wisdom. The guards moved forward and escorted Jake and his team out of the chamber before anyone could say another word. The journey back to the transport ship was silent. Claire Davis looked like she might cry, but she held herself together. Ryan Hayes had a dangerous look in his eyes that Jake had seen before during their military days. Lisa Bennett was pale and kept shaking her head in disbelief. When they were finally back on their ship and moving away from the station, Jake called them together in the main cabin. He told them that they needed to report everything to President Helen Carter and let Earth's government decide how to respond. Ryan said what they were all thinking, which was that Earth had no military power to resist the Council. Their small fleet of exploration ships would be useless against the massive warships he had seen docked at the Council station. Lisa added that the technology gap was enormous, and trying to fight would be suicide. Claire agreed and suggested that Earth should comply with the Council's demands while working through diplomatic channels to improve their status over time. Jake listened to all of them and then looked out the window at the stars. He thought about everything humanity had survived on Earth, wars and plagues and disasters that should have destroyed civilization but never did. Humans were survivors, and they were stubborn in ways that other species might not understand. He wondered if the Galactic Council had made a mistake by humiliating Earth so completely. Sometimes when you push someone down hard enough, they find strength they never knew they had. The ship continued toward Earth, and behind them the Council station grew smaller until it vanished into the darkness. None of them knew it yet, but this moment would be remembered as the beginning of everything that followed. The day Earth learned its place in the galaxy and decided that place was unacceptable. 5 years had passed since the humiliation. At the Council station, and to anyone watching from the outside, Earth appeared to be a broken and compliant world. Human workers loaded or onto Council transport ships every week right on schedule. The monitoring stations around Earth's moon transmitted their data without interruption. Tribute shipments left the solar system carrying precious metals and rare minerals to distant Council worlds. The Galactic Council barely thought about Earth anymore, except when reviewing the resource reports. Humanity had been classified and contained, and that was the end of the story as far as they were concerned. But something was happening beneath the surface that the Council could not see. On Mars, inside a crater that had been modified to hide its true purpose, Captain Ethan Cross walked through corridors carved deep into the red rock. He was young for a captain at only 32 years old, but he had proven himself brilliant during the Academy simulations. President Helen Carter herself had selected him to oversee Project Nightfall, which was the code name for Earth's secret military buildup. The Mars facility was just one part of a network that stretched across the entire solar system. Hidden bases on the moons of Jupiter, research stations buried under the ice of Europa, construction yards on the far side of Saturn's largest moon where the rings provided natural cover from scanning. Ethan entered the main command center where dozens of technicians worked at stations monitoring everything from ship construction to weapons testing. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Craig Peterson, looked up from a display screen and gave a quick nod. Craig had spent 2 years undercover on the Council station, pretending to be a simple maintenance worker while he gathered intelligence about Council military capabilities. The information he sent back had been invaluable. Ethan moved to stand beside him and looked at the data flowing across the screen. It showed the current positions of Council fleet elements within 200 light years of Earth. The Council had no idea that humanity had developed scanning technology that could track their ships through hyperspace. jumps across the solar system on a hidden station orbiting Neptune. Dr. Lisa Bennett stood in her laboratory, surrounded by technology that should not have existed. She had assembled the finest scientific minds from every nation on Earth, and together, they had accomplished what the Council said was impossible. The workbench in front of her held a device no larger than a briefcase, but it contained a faster-than-light drive. It did not require the Council's jump gates. Every species in the galaxy used the gate network because they believed it was the only way to travel between stars quickly. Lisa and her team had proven them wrong by developing a system based on completely different principles. The prototype had already made 3 successful jumps, and the design was being incorporated into every ship in Earth's new fleet. Did another section of her lab, a young scientist named Dr. Peter Grant was working on defensive systems. He had developed energy shields that could adapt in real time to incoming weapons fire. The Council used static shields that either blocked an attack or failed completely. Peter's shields learned from each hit and adjusted their frequency to better absorb the next one. Field tests showed they were 40% more effective than standard Council military shields. Lisa walked over to check his progress, and Peter showed her the latest results with obvious pride. She congratulated him and reminded him that every breakthrough brought Earth closer to the day when they could stand as equals in the galaxy. On Earth itself, President Helen Carter sat in a secure briefing room deep below the Capitol building. Around the table were the leaders of every major nation and the heads of the military and intelligence services. Colonel Ryan Hayes stood at the front of the room presenting the latest status report. He explained that the new fleet now numbered 65 warships of various classes, destroyers that were fast and deadly, cruisers that could take punishment and keep fighting, carriers that launched squadrons of fighters capable of atmospheric and space combat. Every ship had been built using a combination of reverse-engineered Council technology and human innovation. The designs incorporated lessons learned from every war humanity had ever fought. Ryan brought up tactical display showing simulated combat scenarios. The computer models predicted that Earth's fleet could defeat a Council force 3 times its size through superior tactics and unpredictable maneuvers. The key was that Council species had been fighting the same way for thousands of years. Their tactics were refined and efficient, but they were also predictable. Human military doctrine emphasized chaos and adaptation. Earth's ships would not fight the way the Council expected, and that would be their greatest advantage. Training facilities across the solar system ran constant combat drills. Lieutenant Amy Foster led her squadron through another simulation in the training center on Titan. The scenario placed them against overwhelming odds with limited ammunition and damaged shields. Amy barked orders to her pilots as enemy ships swarmed their position. They broke formation and scattered in patterns that seemed random but were actually carefully coordinated. Each ship drew fire away from the others and created openings for counterattacks. The simulation ended with Amy's squadron victorious despite losing 2 fighters. It was an acceptable outcome because the mission objective had been achieved. After the drill, Amy gathered her pilots for the debrief. She told them that Council pilots trained for individual glory and formal tactics. Human pilots trained to work as a unit and to sacrifice for the mission when necessary. That difference would matter when the real fighting started. Her pilots were young and eager, and they believed in what they were doing. They had grown up hearing stories about Earth's humiliation 5 years ago. They trained harder than any generation before them because they knew what was at stake. Intelligence reports continued to flow in from agents, scattered across Council space. Craig Peterson sent word that 3 Council species were planning to propose harsher terms for Earth at the next session. They wanted to reduce humanity's classification to Class 8, which would effectively make Earth a slave world with no rights at all. The vote was scheduled to take place in 6 months. President Carter reviewed the intelligence and made her decision. She sent encrypted orders to every facility and every ship. Project Nightfall was moving to its final phase. Earth would not wait to be enslaved. Earth would strike first. Dr. Lisa Bennett received the order and began final preparations for mass production of the new technologies. Captain Ethan Cross started moving ships from their hidden positions to staging areas closer to Council space. Colonel Ryan Hayes activated sleeper agents who had been positioned throughout the galaxy over the past 5 years. Lieutenant Amy Foster and thousands of other pilots received deployment orders. Everything that had been built and planned and practiced for 5 long years was about to be tested in actual combat. The Galactic Council continued their normal routines, completely unaware of the storm that was gathering. They reviewed Earth's tribute reports and found them satisfactory. They discussed expanding mining operations in the Sol system to extract even more resources. Zethkar had been promoted to the High Council, and he occasionally mentioned Earth as an example of how the classification system worked perfectly. Lesser species needed firm guidance and clear rules. The thought that humanity might resist never crossed his mind, because in 10,000 years of Council history, no Class 7 species had ever successfully rebelled. On Earth, Jake Morrison had been promoted to Admiral and given command of the First Strike Fleet. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking at the stars and thinking about the journey ahead. Beside him stood the same people who had been humiliated 5 years ago. Lisa Bennett was his chief science advisor. Ryan Hayes commanded tactical operations. Claire Davis had retired from active diplomacy, but she sent a message wishing them victory. The bridge crew moved efficiently through their pre-launch checks. Every system showed green. Every ship in the fleet reported ready. Admiral Morrison gave the order, and 65 warships activated their new faster-than-light drives. They vanished from the solar system in pulses of blue-white light heading toward their first target. The Velcrin home fleet would be the ones to learn that Earth remembered every insult, and Earth always paid its debts. The time for hiding and preparing was over. The time for revenge had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The Velcrin home system was peaceful when Earth's fleet arrived in the darkness between planets. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the tactical display show enemy positions. The Velcrin had 60 warships, stationed around their homeworld in a defensive formation that had not changed in 3,000 years. They rotated shifts and maintained patrol routes that were predictable down to the minute. Intelligence reports from Craig Peterson had given Earth every detail of their operations, including the fact that most of the fleet would be in rest cycle during this specific 8-hour window. Jake gave the order, and 20 human warships dropped out of their faster-than-light approach at the edge of weapons range. The Velcrin sensors detected them immediately, and alarms began sounding across their fleet. Commander Vikthin was in charge of the home defense, and he looked at his screens in confusion. The signatures matched Earth vessels, but that made no sense. Humans were Class 7 and barely capable of maintaining the few outdated ships the Council allowed them. Vikthin ordered his communications officer to hail the human ships and demand an explanation, but the response he received was not what he expected. Admiral Morrison's face appeared on every Velcrin screen, and his voice was calm and cold. He said that Earth rejected the Council's classification and rejected their authority over humanity. He said that the Velcrin would be the first to learn what happened when you pushed humans too far. Then the transmission ended, and the human ships opened fire before Vikthin could even respond. Captain Ethan Cross commanded the lead destroyer, and his ship moved like nothing the Velcrin had ever seen. It rolled and dove through three-dimensional space, while its weapons fired in patterns that seemed to come from multiple angles at once. The Velcrin shields were designed to absorb direct hits from the front or sides, but Ethan's ship fired at weak points where shield generators connected to the main power grid. His weapons punched through and damaged critical systems before the enemy could adjust. The battle became chaos within minutes. Human ships refused to follow standard engagement protocols. They did not form up in lines or maintain defensive positions. Instead, they swarmed like insects, attacking from unexpected vectors and breaking off before the Velcrin could target them effectively. Lieutenant Amy Foster led her fighter squadron straight through the middle of a Velcrin, cruiser formation drawing fire while the larger human ships flanked from above and below. The Velcrin tried to adapt, but their tactical computers could not predict what the human ships would do next because there was no pattern to follow. Commander Vikthon realized he was losing and ordered his ships to activate their emergency jump drives to escape, but when he gave the command, nothing happened. Dr. Lisa Bennett's virus had been uploaded into the Velcrin network weeks ago through a simple data packet hidden in one of Earth's routine tribute reports. The virus had spread silently through their systems, waiting for this moment. Now it activated and caused targeting systems to lag by half a second and shield harmony. CS to fluctuate randomly, and most importantly, jump drive calculations to produce errors that would send ships into stars or empty space if they tried to flee. 15. Velcrin ships were destroyed in the first hour. 20 more were crippled and drifting without power. The remaining vessels finally managed to form a defensive cluster around their homeworld, but by then it was too late. Human ships had complete control of the orbital space, and the Velcrin fleet was trapped. Ethan brought his destroyer alongside the Velcrin flagship and locked weapons on their bridge. He transmitted a message directly to Vikthon, offering surrender terms. The Velcrin commander had no choice. His fleet was broken, and his homeworld was vulnerable. He accepted the surrender and ordered his remaining ships to power down their weapons. Jake Morrison then broadcast a message that was transmitted not just to the Velcrin, but to every Council monitoring station within range. He said that Earth demanded the immediate withdrawal of all monitoring stations from the Sol system and the return of all human workers from Council facilities. He said the Council had 1 week to comply, or the attacks would continue against every species that had profited from Earth's exploitation. He made it clear that humanity did not want to destroy the Council, but would do whatever was necessary to be treated as equals. The transmission ended, and the human fleet began its jump back to Earth space. They left the Velcrin home fleet crippled but intact. Jake had been very specific about his orders to avoid civilian casualties and unnecessary destruction. This was not a war of conquest. This was a message that needed to be heard across the entire galaxy. On the Council station, Zethkar received the reports with disbelief that turned to rage. He stood in the emergency session of the High Council and demanded immediate military action against Earth. The other Council members were equally shocked, but some were more cautious. A representative from the Therian species pointed out that humanity had just defeated one of the most powerful military forces in Council space with minimal losses. Perhaps Earth was more dangerous than they had assumed. Zethkar dismissed this concern and insisted that the Velcrin had simply been caught by surprise. He argued that a proper military response with overwhelming force would crush Earth quickly and permanently. The Council debated for hours while messages poured in from across their territory. Other Class 7 and Class 6 species were watching what Earth had done, and some were asking dangerous questions about their own classifications. The High Council eventually voted to authorize a punitive fleet. 300 warships would gather from multiple Council species and converge on Earth within 2 weeks. The fleet would destroy humanity's orbital facilities and military capability, then impose even stricter controls to prevent future resistance. Zethkar volunteered to lead the operation, personally because he wanted to be the one to put Earth back in its place. But while the Council prepared their response, Earth was already moving to its next phase. Lieutenant Craig Peterson sent urgent intelligence about the Council's plans. Admiral Morrison reviewed the data with Colonel Ryan Hayes and Dr. Lisa Bennett. They had expected this reaction and already had countermeasures ready. Ryan explained that a direct battle against 300 ships would be difficult even with superior tactics. Lisa suggested they attack the Council's infrastructure instead of their military. The plan was approved and human. Strike teams deployed across Council space. Lieutenant Amy Foster led a commando unit to a major Council shipyard in the Drexus system. They infiltrated during a shift change using forged credentials that Craig had provided. Once inside, they planted explosives in the construction berths and sabotaged the computer systems that controlled the automated assembly lines. The charges detonated simultaneously, destroying dozens of partially built warships and setting back the Council's production capacity by years. Similar attacks hit fuel depots and supply stations and communications relays throughout Council territory. None of the targets were civilian, and every strike was carefully planned to avoid loss of life, while causing maximum disruption to military logistics. The Council fleet gathering to attack Earth suddenly found itself struggling with fuel shortages and unreliable supply lines. Ships that were supposed to rendezvous at the staging point arrived late or not at all. Dr. Lisa Bennett unleashed the second wave of her cyberweapons. This virus was more aggressive and targeted the tactical computers on Council warships. Did not destroy anything, but instead introduced tiny errors into targeting calculations and delayed communications between ships by random intervals. In normal operations, these flaws would barely be noticed, but in combat, they would be fatal. Earth's defensive preparations continued around the clock. The entire human fleet positioned itself near Saturn, where the rings provided cover and tactical advantages. Weapons platforms were deployed throughout the outer solar system, creating layers of defense. Every ship and every crew member knew that the real battle was coming, and it would determine whether humanity survived as a free species or was crushed into permanent slavery. Admiral Morrison recorded a message to be sent to Earth in case the defense failed. He said that humanity had fought with honor and courage. He said that even if this battle was lost, the example would inspire others to resist tyranny. He deleted the message because he had no intention of losing. Earth had been underestimated once, and that mistake had given humanity the time to prepare. The Council would not get a second chance. The Council fleet finally assembled at the staging point. Beyond Neptune's orbit, and their numbers were impressive, despite the delays caused by Earth's infrastructure attacks, 240 warships from 8 different Council species hung in formation waiting for the order to advance. Zethkar stood on the bridge of the command carrier and looked at the tactical display with satisfaction. Even with the losses from fuel depot sabotage and supply disruptions, he commanded more than enough firepower to overwhelm Earth's defenses. He gave the order to advance, and the fleet moved forward in a formation that had been used successfully for thousands of years. Admiral Jake Morrison watched from his command center on the flagship as the enemy fleet crossed into the outer solar system. His tactical display showed every Council ship and their positions relative to Earth's defensive network. Colonel Ryan Hayes stood beside him, coordinating the defense from multiple command nodes scattered across different locations. The plan was to draw the Council fleet deeper into the system where Earth's advantages would be greatest. Jake ordered all human ships to fall back toward Saturn, and the Council fleet followed, thinking that humanity was retreating in fear. The first weapons platforms activated when the Council fleet passed Uranus. These were automated systems hidden in the debris field of broken asteroids and old satellite wreckage. They fired volleys of missiles that streaked toward the enemy formation from unexpected angles. The Council shields absorbed most of the damage, but several ships were hit and forced to drop back for repairs. Zethkar ordered his fleet to destroy the platforms, but by the time his ships targeted them, the platforms had already powered down and gone silent again. Lieutenant Amy Foster launched from one of the carrier ships positioned behind Saturn's moon Titan. Her squadron consisted of 40 fighters that were small and fast, enough to hide among the ice particles of Saturn's rings. They waited until the Council fleet was fully engaged with the human capital ships before attacking. Amy led her pilots in a dive that brought them up underneath a Council cruiser formation. The fighters fired armor-piercing rounds at the engine sections where shields were weakest. 3 cruisers lost power and began drifting out of formation, creating gaps in the enemy line. Captain Ethan Cross commanded a destroyer group that used hit-and-run tactics against the Council flanks. His ships would appear from behind Saturn's moon's fire, a full weapons spread, and then disappear back into cover before the enemy could respond effectively. The Council ships tried to pursue, but the gravitational effects of Saturn and its moons made navigation dangerous for vessels that were not familiar with the system. The Council ships collided while trying to maneuver around Enceladus, and both were severely damaged. The battle raged for 6 hours without pause. Human ships took casualties, but so did the Council fleet, and the exchange rate favored Earth. For every human ship destroyed, 2 or 3 Council vessels were crippled or knocked out of the fight. Zethkar could not understand how this was possible. His fleet had superior numbers and equivalent technology, but the humans fought with a ferocity and unpredictability that his tactical computers could not counter. Every time he adjusted his formation, the humans changed their approach. Every time he concentrated his forces, they scattered and attacked from new directions. Dr. Lisa Bennett monitored the battle from her lab on Mars and watched as her cyberweapons did their work. Council ships were experiencing targeting errors that caused their weapons to miss by small but critical margins. Their communications were delayed just enough to prevent coordinated responses. Their shield harmonics were fluctuating in ways that created temporary weak points for human weapons to exploit. The Council crews were skilled and experienced, but they were thing against technology that actively worked against them, while appearing to function normally. On the second day of battle, the Council fleet had been reduced to 170 operational ships. Zethkar realized that continuing the assault would result in unacceptable losses, but retreating would be a humiliation worse than the Velkrin defeat. He decided on a compromise and ordered his fleet to establish a defensive position beyond Pluto's orbit. From there, they could blockade Earth and prevent any ships from leaving the system while he called for reinforcements. From the Council, Homer recognized the Council's new strategy immediately. A blockade would eventually starve Earth of resources and trade opportunities. He called a meeting with his senior officers and they discussed options. Colonel Ryan Hayes suggested a breakthrough attempt to scatter the blockade, but that would cost lives and ships. Dr. Lisa Bennett proposed a different approach. She explained that Earth had already demonstrated military capability, but now they needed to demonstrate restraint and offer the Council a way to end this. Without further losses, Jake agreed and recorded a new message that was broadcast to the Council fleet and transmitted across the galaxy through every available channel. He said that Earth had no desire to continue this conflict. He said that humanity wanted peace, but only on terms of mutual respect and equality. He offered the Council a choice. They could withdraw their blockade and agree to negotiate Earth's status, or they could continue fighting and watch as humanity dismantled their military and economic power piece by piece. He gave them 48 hours to decide. Zethkar received the message and felt his anger rise to dangerous levels. He wanted to reject the offer immediately and order a renewed assault, but his officers advised caution. The fleet had taken heavy casualties and morale was suffering. Some of the Council species were already questioning whether this fight was worth the cost. Zethkar sent an encrypted message back to the High Council requesting guidance, but he already knew what their answer would be. The Council could not afford to appear weak, but they also could not afford to lose more ships. While the Council debated, Lieutenant Craig Peterson sent another intelligence report from his position on the Council station. He had intercepted communications between High Council members and learned that several species were proposing biological warfare against Earth. If humanity would not submit, then they would be exterminated completely. The proposal was being seriously considered by the hardline faction led by Zethkar's own species. President Helen Carter received this intelligence and immediately called an emergency meeting of Earth's leadership. The situation had escalated beyond military conflict into an existential threat. If the Council decided to use biological weapons, then Earth needed to respond with overwhelming force to prevent it. But using weapons of mass destruction went against everything humanity claimed to stand for. The decision weighed heavily on everyone in the room. Admiral Morrison proposed a demonstration of capability rather than actual destruction. He suggested showing the Council that Earth had the power to destroy them completely, but chose not to use it. Colonel Ryan Hayes added that humanity needed to reveal just how much intelligence they had gathered about the Council. Let them know that Earth had been watching and learning and preparing for every possible scenario, including total war. The plan was approved, and Captain Ethan Cross received the most dangerous mission of the war. He would take a single ship loaded with every advanced weapon system Earth had developed and position it within striking range of the Council station. His orders were not to attack, but to make it absolutely clear that he could, if given the command. It was a bluff, but only partially, because Earth did have weapons platforms hidden around several Council homeworlds, and the capability to use them, Ethan selected his best crew and prepared. The ship that had been designated EDF Retribution. The vessel was packed with enough firepower to level a city and equipped with the most advanced cloaking technology humanity had created. They launched from Mars and made the jump to Council space while both fleets waited in tense standoff. Around Earth, the mission would either end the war or start a new phase that would leave millions dead across the galaxy. Back at Saturn, Admiral Morrison watched his displays and counted down the hours until Ethan reached his destination. The Council blockade remained in position, but no further attacks had been launched. Both sides were waiting to see what would happen next. Amy Foster and her pilot stood ready to launch at a moment's notice. Lisa Bennett continued monitoring Council communications for any sign of biological weapon deployment. Every human ship and station was at maximum alert. The 48-hour deadline approached. Still, the Council had not responded to Earth's offer. Zethkar sat in his command chair and stared at the human fleet positions. He had never imagined that a Class 7 species could cause this much damage to the Council's military power. Part of him wanted to admit defeat and negotiate, but his pride would not allow it. He waited for orders from the High Council, knowing that whatever they decided would determine the future of both humanity and the Council. Itself, Captain Ethan Cross brought the EDF Retribution out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Council stations. Detection range and immediately activated. The cloaking systems. The ship vanished from sensors as it drifted closer to the massive station that hung between the three dying stars. Ethan watched his displays carefully as they approached, knowing that one mistake would mean instant death for him and his crew. The station's defenses were formidable, with weapons platforms that could vaporize a ship in seconds, but those defenses were designed to detect normal threats, not a vessel using technology the Council did not know existed. It took 3 hours to reach firing position, and during that time, Ethan reviewed his orders again. He was not here to attack, but to demonstrate that he could. His ship carried enough weapons to cripple the station, and he needed to make that fact absolutely clear to everyone watching. When the Retribution was finally in position, Ethan opened a communication channel that broadcast on every frequency the Council used. His face appeared on screens throughout the station and across the entire Council network. He spoke calmly and clearly, saying that he was Captain Ethan Cross of Earth, and his ship was currently within weapons range of the Council station. He said that his targeting systems were locked on critical infrastructure points and his weapons were armed and ready to fire. But he was not here to start a war. He was here to deliver a message that the Council needed to hear and understand. Then he transmitted data that caused panic in every Council chamber and military command center. The data showed the positions of weapons platforms that Earth had secretly deployed around 12 different Council homeworlds over the past 2 years. Each platform was equipped with kinetic bombardment systems capable of destroying cities from orbit. The platforms were hidden using the same cloaking technology that made the Retribution invisible, and they had been in place waiting for activation codes that only President Helen Carter could authorize. Ethan explained that these weapons could be launched within minutes if Earth gave the order, but humanity did not want to use them. He continued by revealing detailed intelligence about Council military operations, including fleet movements and classified defense strategies, and even personal communications between High Council members. Earth had been watching and listening to everything for years. The Council's networks had been compromised at every level in humanity. Knew about the biological warfare proposal that Zethkar and his allies were planning. Ethan made it clear that if the Council attempted to exterminate humanity, then Earth would respond by destroying every Council homeworld. Simultaneously, the transmission ended, and Ethan waited for the response he knew would come. On the Council station, emergency sessions were convened and security teams scrambled to find the cloaked human ship, but their sensors showed nothing. Zethkar watched the transmission with growing horror as he realized that Earth had outplayed the Council at every turn. The biological weapons he had been planning to use were now impossible because humanity would detect the preparations and strike first. A response came from an unexpected source. An elderly council member named Kira from the Nexian species requested a direct channel to Captain Cross. Ethan accepted, and her image appeared on his screen. She looked tired and sad as she spoke. She said that she had argued against Earth's classification from the beginning, because she recognized that humanity had potential that others refused to see. She said that the Council had made terrible mistakes, driven by arrogance and greed. She asked Ethan what it would take for this conflict to end peacefully. Ethan told her the truth. Earth wanted equality and respect. Humanity wanted to be treated as partners in the galactic community, not as slaves or resources to be exploited. Earth wanted all monitoring stations removed and all workers returned in reparations. Paid for the resources stolen over 5 years? Most importantly, Earth wanted a seat on the Council with full voting rights so that no other species would suffer the same treatment humanity had endured. In exchange, Earth would share its technology and knowledge and become a productive member of the galactic civilization. Kira listened and then asked for time to bring this proposal to the full Council. Ethan agreed to wait, but made it clear that his weapons remained armed and ready. The Retribution held its position while across the galaxy, the Council debated humanity's fate. Some members, like Zethkar, argued for continued resistance, but they were now in the minority. Too many species had lost ships and resources fighting Earth. Too many questions were being asked by other subjugated worlds. The Council's authority was crumbling because they had been proven fallible. On Earth, Admiral Jake Morrison received updates from Ethan and waited with the rest of humanity. President Helen Carter addressed the planet in a broadcast explaining everything that had happened and what was at stake. She said that Earth had fought for the right to stand as equals, and now they would see if the Council had the wisdom to accept peace. The entire human population held its breath waiting for an answer. The Council vote took 2 days of debate and negotiation. In the end, the proposal passed by a narrow margin. Zethkar and his hardline supporters were outvoted by moderate Council members who recognized that continuing this fight would destroy the Council itself. Earth would be granted Class 2 status, which was equal to most Council species. All monitoring stations would be removed within 30 days. All human workers would be returned immediately. Reparations would be paid from the treasury of those species that had profited most from Earth's exploitation, and Earth would receive a permanent seat on the Council with full voting rights effective immediately. President Carter received the formal notification in 4. The first time in weeks, she allowed herself to smile. She sent orders to Admiral Morrison to stand down the fleet and recall all strike teams. She contacted Ethan and told him to return home with honor. The war was over, and humanity had won not through conquest, but through the demonstration of strength tempered by restraint. Captain Ethan Cross deactivated his weapons and brought the Retribution out of cloak. Council sensors finally detected his ship and saw how close he had been the entire time. He transmitted a final message saying that Earth looked forward to working with the Council as partners and allies. Then he engaged his faster-than-light drive and jumped back toward home. His crew cheered as they left Council space behind, knowing they had accomplished something that would be remembered for generations. 3 months later, Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the Council chamber wearing the formal uniform of Earth's diplomatic service. The chamber looked different from this perspective. He was no longer standing on the platform as a supplicant, but sitting in one of the tier seats reserved for full Council members. Around him sat representatives from the other species, and their attitudes toward him ranged from respect to fear to lingering resentment. Zethkar had been removed from his position, and his species had paid heavy fines for their role in exploiting Earth. A new Velcrin representative sat in his place and avoided making eye contact with Jake. The session began with formal business, including trade agreements and territorial disputes. When it came time for Earth to cast its first official vote, Jake stood and spoke clearly. He voted in favor of reviewing the classification system for all species to ensure that no other world would be exploited the way Earth had been. Several Council members shifted uncomfortably, but the motion passed. It was a small step, but it was a beginning. After the session ended, Kira approached Jake in the corridor outside the chamber. She congratulated him on Earth's victory, and said she hoped humanity would use its new position wisely. Jake thanked her and said that Earth remembered who their friends were during the darkest times. Kira smiled and said she looked forward to seeing what humanity would contribute to the galaxy. Now that they were free to do so, Jake returned to his quarters and recorded a message to be sent back to Earth. He said that the hard part was over, but the real work was just beginning. Humanity had proven they could fight and win, but now they needed to prove they could build and cooperate. He said he was proud of everyone who had sacrificed and struggled to bring Earth to this moment. He said the future was uncertain, but for the first time it was a future that humanity would shape for themselves. On Earth, President Carter watched the message and felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. The war had united humanity in a common cause, but peace would test whether they could maintain that unity. She looked at the reports from across the solar system, showing construction projects and scientific research and cultural exchanges with other species who had approached Earth seeking friendship. The galaxy was opening up to humanity, and the possibilities were endless. Dr. Lisa Bennett stood in her laboratory on Mars and looked at the prototype technologies that had won the war. She thought about what else could be accomplished now that Earth's brightest minds could focus on creation instead of destruction. Lieutenant Amy Foster trained new pilots not for war but for exploration and defense. Colonel Ryan Hayes began dismantling the secret military networks and transitioning them into legitimate security forces. Lieutenant Craig Peterson finally came home from his undercover assignment and reunited with his family after 5 years of living in shadows across human space. People celebrated the victory, but they also remembered the cost. Ships had been lost, and lives had been given to secure Earth's freedom. Memorials were built, and names were carved in stone, so that future generations would know who had stood against impossible odds and refused to surrender. The story of Earth's Ruthless revenge became legend not because humanity had destroyed their enemies, but because they had proven that even the smallest voice deserved to be heard, and in the council chamber, Jake Morrison sat in Earth's seat and watched as the galaxy slowly began to change. Other Class 7 and Class 6 species were already petitioning for reviews of their status. The council that had seemed eternal and unchanging was being forced to adapt. Humanity had not conquered the stars, but they had earned their place among them, and that made all the difference.